You have a very special tie today. Why is that?
No, this particular tie is an Aztec tie. So I try and use ties that are either around biodiversity or climate change or cultures.
But why is that important to you to represent this in a tie?
I think as people like to sort of have the signatures, one of mine is ties and cufflinks and watches. It's just something I enjoy wearing.
And you were saying that you also use your tie as a negotiation tactic. Can you explain that?
Yes, when we're negotiating one of our documents in ITBES, if things are going really well, I'll wear a biodiversity tie such as I call it my Chinese happy chicken tie. The chickens are happy because they haven't been killed to be eaten. If things are going badly, I'll wear my dodo tie to show that things are really not going well. So I do use a tie as a way to bring a little bit of humour into some very, very serious negotiations.
Because the dodo is extinct.
The dodo is extinct, unfortunately. And the basic point is, if we continue our negotiations in a bad way, it threatens all of us human well-being.
More recently, you've been involved with ITBES and warn of massive losses of biodiversity. For example, I'm just going to say the numbers. 1 million species are under threat of extinction. 75% of land mass have been converted. We lost 85% of wetlands, and a third of land mass has been used for agriculture. Why is that a problem?
It's a very serious problem. Nature, or biodiversity, provides lots of things for human well-being. It actually helps to provide food, clean water, energy, medicines. These are called provisioning services or material contributions. In addition, nature also helps to control climate, pollution, pollination, floods and droughts, pests and diseases. And it also is spiritual. People enjoy being with nature. They like walking in a forest, they like walking on a beach or by a river. So there's inspiration and learning from nature. What we're doing is we're destroying nature. By producing food the way we produce it, by the way we produce timber and fibre and energy, we're losing, as you've said, species. We're converting our land into monoculture agriculture and monoculture forests. And so we're actually undermining many of these services that are effectively good for human well-being. And so climate change and biodiversity, they interact with each other, so we have to look at them. And they are both not only environmental issues, they're development issues, food, water, human health. They're actually economic issues. Nature has value, and also by destroying the climate or changing the climate, it costs money. It's a social issue. The poorest people in the world suffer. It's a moral issue. Why should we destroy nature? So clearly a very important issue.
I think you also try to advocate that ecosystems have a value. Can you put some numbers on that?
We can value how nature helps us to provide food, energy and medicines. We buy and sell food, energy, medicines in the marketplace, so it has what we call market value. But it also, as I've already said, helps to control climate, pollution, pollination, etc. And that actually also has economic value.
But are there actually companies who see that value and who are prepared to pay for that?
I think many companies are becoming more and more concerned about losing nature and actually do understand it has both what we call market value, non-market value and social value. Very hard to put a global number. We did for pollination nearly $600 billion a year.
What costs $600 billion?
No, it's what's the value of pollination.
The value of pollination.
If we didn't have bees and butterflies pollinating especially fruit crops, we would have less agricultural production by about $600 billion a year. Very hard to put single numbers on the value for climate, the value for pollution, the value for floods and storms. But as we destroy our mangrove swamps, then suddenly the storm surges destroy the local village. And so there's a lot of value, and that needs to be considered in decision making.
And this is understandable, and everyone, I think, can relate to that. However, if we are in Switzerland, our audience is in Switzerland, Swiss people enjoy nature and they also protect nature. And I could argue that the Swiss Alps actually have quite a lot of biodiversity. And if we go hiking, we see green hills and we see a lot of bugs and plants. So actually, how does that affect us, the biodiversity crisis?
Well, where we're losing biodiversity, we are adversely affecting it everywhere in the world. Switzerland probably is one of the countries that's in better condition than many. If you go to many tropical countries, we're still deforesting. The Amazon is being deforested at a rapid rate. The forests in Indonesia, in the Congo, or Democratic Republic are all being lost. We've lost most of the grasslands, most of the wetlands around the world, basically. So the rate of loss of biodiversity does vary from one country to another. And I think this is an interesting point you make. When you go walking or hiking in the hills in Switzerland, it's beautiful. You see the cows with their big bells, you see the rolling hills and think
nature's no problem.
Wonderful. It really does look good. But in reality, if you look at water quality in many parts of the world, the rivers are still polluted. And in fact, in most European countries, water quality still isn't that good. It may be chemically better than it was years ago, but biologically, it's still degraded.
But is biodiversity really such a big crisis? Because, okay, we're changing the planet, we lose habitats, we lose wetlands, but animals and plants can also adapt and evolve. Can't they just adapt and evolve to this new change of planet that we are bringing about?
There are several reasons we're losing biodiversity and are threatening species. One is that we're effectively converting all our natural ecosystems to agricultural systems and forests. Secondly, we're overexploiting both land and marine. Third is climate change. Fourth is pollution. And the fifth is invasive alien species. Yes, species can adapt, but actually most of them are failing to adapt to climate change. That's why we say 1 million species out of 8.1 million species, so over 10%, almost 15%, are threatened with extinction. Now, we can save most of those if we start to reduce the threat of climate change, if we stop over-exploiting, if we stop converting our systems. It's not inevitable that we will lose 1 million species, but 1 million species are at threat.
What does actually need to happen to avoid this mass extinction?
So what we said in our recent report was we can't look at what we call sectors one at a time. That is to say, when you think of agriculture, you also have to think of water, you also have to think of energy, you also have to think of transport at the same time as biodiversity or nature. So you need what we call multi-sectoral planning. Secondly, we need to look at the economic system. We need to get rid of these perverse subsidies in agriculture, energy and transportation that are actually causing both climate change and a loss of biodiversity.
The subsidies that are also happening in Switzerland and the European Union.
Yes. We also need that when countries look at their economic growth and they look at GDP, it doesn't take into account what we're doing with nature. So we need to recognize that nature has what we call natural capital. And so governments and the private sector need to think about how do you bring this into their decision making.
It's I don't know, it seems a bit ironic because one of the main drivers of this biodiversity loss is obviously industrial agriculture. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
So, but industrial agriculture was one of the main achievements of the Green Revolution, and that actually helped save people's lives and, you know, helped avoid the starvation of millions of people. And now, how does that fit together if we are now trying to scale back industrial agriculture and we have a rise in population? Won't we just make people starve?
So the Green Revolution was incredibly important, and Borlaug won the World Peace Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize. Well deserved. It saved millions of people, especially in Asia. Okay, what we're now saying is we have these new hybrid plants. They still need to continue to develop to be more climate sensitive, more drought resistant, temperature tolerant, salinity tolerant. So we need to continue doing research on the plants. But what we're saying now is we think we can actually feed the world without any more what we call extensification. Stop cutting down the forest, stop cutting down the grasslands, and stop converting mangrove swamps. We can do it in several ways. One of them is we waste 30 to 40% of all food produced is wasted. In developing countries, it often doesn't get to the market. They don't have good transportation or storage facilities. In Europe and North America, restaurants give you too much food, it goes in the bin. Many of us buy too much food, we put it in our refrigerator. A week later, we throw it away. So we can reduce food waste. Many farmers in Africa only get 1 ton per hectare of food. Easily, with a little bit more ecological knowledge, a little bit more agrochemicals, they can get 3 and 4 tons per hectare. Yeah. It's a rural development issue. It's not a technology issue. It's not even a behaviour issue. I once chaired or directed an international assessment on agriculture. I'm absolutely convinced we can produce the food we need without affecting the environment.
Do you advocate a kind of biodiversity fee, like a CO2 emission fee?
Not particularly, but we do need to get the market correct. So there are ways that you can actually, put a tax on destructive processes, basically. And you can also do the reverse, put a small incentive to people to be sustainable. The other point we talk about a lot is we need everyone to work together. We need a governance structure that recognises that governments need to work with the private sector, need to work with civil society. This is not just an issue for governments or just for the private sector or just for individuals. We all need to work together. We've got to start to trust each other. And actually, when I look at an issue like climate change or biodiversity, it's normally controlled by the Environment Department. But it's an issue for the Energy Ministry, the Water Ministry, the Agriculture Ministry, the Tourism Ministry, the Finance Minister, as well as head. So we've got individual governments, national governments. The government departments have to work together. And the same internationally. We want the Convention on Climate to work with the Convention on Biodiversity, land degradation. We need to work with the WTO, the World Trade Organization. So we need a different governance structure where people work together.
This depends on economic growth. And you're basically saying we need to change this model of economic growth, the way that we're living it in society. Are you criticizing the capitalist model?
Many academics will criticize the capitalistic model. We did not go that far. We said we need an evolution. We don't say capitalism is bad, but we need to see an evolution. If we continue with all of the unsustainable approaches we use today to produce energy and use energy, to produce food the way we use food, then we are not going to be sustainable. I'm an optimist, and we show in the document that you can have a more sustainable agricultural system. You can have a more sustainable energy system. I believe you can have economic growth, but we have to think through carefully how to have that sustainable economic growth. And we also have to have individuals think, what do they mean by a quality of life? Is your quality of life better because you've got a bigger house, a bigger car, you take more vacation?
For most people, that's the case.
And so for most people it is. But also one has to think that many of the practices people have are not good for themselves. Some of our diets, lots of meat, lots of fat, aren't necessarily good for us. We are not advocating being vegans or vegetarians, but we're pointing out that a more balanced diet is good for your own human health and for the environment.
So people should diet to save the planet?
You could say that. In fact, a lot of people have become convinced to be vegetarians and to become vegans because they do have, from their perspective, a moral conscience, not only for the animals that are eaten, but that actually is good for the environment. Personally, I will not become a vegetarian or a vegan, but I have far less meat than I used to have. Make sure that the fish that I eat is sustainably caught. So we can all do things for the planet.
Although it's always a moral argument, and that's not usually a very effective driver to change people's behavior.
That's absolutely true. But I think we can show people they shouldn't waste energy, they shouldn't waste water, and they shouldn't waste food. And actually in California a few years ago, it was very, very hot, and the use of air conditioning, the electricity system kept breaking down, and they had what we call rolling breakdowns. And so they went on television, they said to the populace in California, can you change your thermometer from 70 degrees to 72, use less air conditioning, only 2 degrees, and all the rolling blackouts stopped. There were certain places where they had droughts because they had less rainfall. Please have a 5-minute shower, not a half-hour shower. So when you explain to people the implications, they actually get it.
When they're directly affected,
exactly,
in this case as
exactly.
well.